So I'm very excited about our next speaker. He's usually based in Seattle, but today he's broadcasting from beautiful St. Louis, Missouri. And I'm talking about Dragos Margintu, who is with us. He's a machine learning and decision systems scientist with Boeing Research and Technology, who is currently Boeing's Senior Technical Fellow in Machine Learning and the AI Chief Technologist of the company. His research interests include robust machine learning, trustworthy decision systems, probabilistic models for uncertainty, anomaly detection, inverse reinforcement learning, and AI for design. Dragos was one of the research pioneers in ensemble learning and cost-sensitive learning. At Boeing, he designed and developed computational solutions for airplane maintenance, autonomous systems, manufacturer optimization, and anomaly detection. He received his PhD in machine learning in 2001 from Oregon State University, being advised by Dr. Tom Dietrich. In his free time, Dragos coaches middle schoolers for mathematics competitions or takes his camera out to photograph nature. Dragos, it is a true privilege to have you here with us. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Jose. And thank you, everybody. I'd like to share some thoughts about robustness in AI and in building decision systems. Probably many of you do it. However, all of us try to build this engineering field, this AI engineering, or the future of, software engineering, in which we will be able to build robust systems out of components. Right now, only good researchers who are inclined to take their algorithms and to spend time to focus on robustness can talk about that. But let's be frank, we do not have rules and procedures to build robust systems. It's basically a research field with a lot of knowledge. This is reflected in the words of Michael Jordan, where basically he states that there is a revolution that hasn't happened yet. We have a lot of demos. We have interesting results. However, we do not have yet robust systems, nor the science to build those robust systems. Well, let's see today how we can build that, or what are some ideas towards building that. So first of all, I'm pretty sure that those of you who have developed systems that make decisions and act in the world, and those can be a robot or can be some sort of a system that interacts, let's say, in a manufacturing environment, or an advisory system, know that probably it's almost never an end-to-end learned models. In fact, we have more an idea of machine learning in which learned models fit here and there in the right place. And more importantly, we want these components that come together to make these decisions and actions to be accurate and robust. And we also want the system to be accurate and robust. Now, how do we do that? And where do we need to depart from standard machine learning approaches? Now, we all in machine learning for the last 30, 40 years, when we publish a paper, when we publish some results, we talk about accuracy, right? And we analyze the accuracy of our algorithms. In practice, we care more about aspects of robustness. And what we've seen is that the AI engineer or the decision system engineer has to tune this trade-off. It's actually typically a trade-off. Most of you have seen that you have to give up some accuracy for attaining some robustness. We have to understand these dimensions and how they are achieved. In practice, those of you who have developed a system that works in the real world have seen that it's pretty easy to describe how how the system should work in normal conditions. Let's say you want to have a robot that follows a lane. That's pretty easy. What's hard is to describe and to specify a loss function for what are the consequences if that strong requirement of following the lane starts to be violated. What if you are 5 centimeters to the right or to the left? What if only occasionally you hit the center line? What if you are on the center line? And so on. So a big aspect of this robustness is the fact that we, in the lab, we train our models and design our systems based on data that we collected in the past. However, we know when we design these systems, we know that there are some situations that we haven't encountered, and for those we call known unknowns. We know that, let's say for our robot that has to follow a lane or a line, occasionally it will hit the center line, and we can imagine some of those situations. Those are the known unknowns, and for those we build what we call design time monitors. The hardest problem is, however, when we deploy this robot or this system or this decision system to handle those unknown unknowns. We know for sure that there will be situations and there will be data instances that will have to be acted upon that we have not anticipated. What should we do about those? And those phenomena or observations do exist. First of all, it is impossible to model everything. It's impossible to enumerate all preconditions of an action, and it's impossible to enumerate all implicit consequences of an action. Also, in machine learning, based on the fundamental theorem of machine learning, we know that we always don't want to we don't want a model that's overly complex. So we deliberately have to oversimplify our models, but in the meantime, they have to capture the complexity of the environment. So the driving idea of our robustness research and our robustness research moving into engineering is the fact that these practical systems have to be designed and have to be implemented without having a complete model of the world. There will be always an observation, a situation, a set of decisions that have to be made that have not been anticipated. So this is my central question, and I want to start with our central standard for machine learning. We have training data, we have a learn model, right? And we have the instances. What happens if this X now is not from the training distribution, and we have to handle it, and we have to handle it safely? Do we have the mechanisms in machine learning to do that? And let's be frank, those of you who have developed systems, as far as, back in the 80s or 90s, we know that we have to do something extra than just measuring accuracy. And let me give you an example from back in the 90s, actually. Dean Pomerleau, who at that point was a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon University, he's a faculty there now, he built a system for steering on a car, and he wanted the system to drive across America on the freeway. Now, one thing that he did that wasn't mentioned actually at the top of his papers, but it was always buried there, one thing that we did, he needed to check if this system is competent, if his steering system is actually relating to the to the input. So if the inputs are something that he can handle. And what he did, he was actually using a single layer neural network, and the inference was going on in the truck that they were using. So what they were doing, aside of predicting the steering, which was the main output of the system, they were also trying to predict the next image. And if the next image was radically off from the previous image, they will shut down the system thinking that basically the network is incompetent. Now, many of you do that. However, the standard model for machine learning doesn't allow us to do it. So what I want to propose is for all of us to think about not having a single output or not having just a model for our prediction class for continuous value in the case of regression, but to have a separate way to compute the competence of our model for that function. Now, how do we do that? Well, the simplest would be to estimate our conditional density, P of y given x, right? If that P of y given x is accurate, we can threshold it. So there would be a self-competence monitor. And if you haven't done so, I highly recommend to do it. Now, in practice, you also need to calibrate those probabilities using, let's say, Plath calibration or your favorite other method of calibration. And again, that would be a way to use the same model, the same learned model, but use its conditional probabilities to output a self-competence. Now, we know that there are challenges for that. In particular, neural nets tend to output high conditional densities in regions in which data is low density. So, which is an issue that we have to take care of. And there are certain papers that have been published, especially in the last 2 years, that try to deal with those for the particular neural network architectures. But there are also other ways to compute this competence. So, for example, estimating a surprise, for example, on validation data, we can measure the expected high class frequencies. And as soon as we detect a departure from the class frequencies, we can shut down the system or say that the system is incompetent. We can also monitor auxiliary regularities. For example, in a paper in 2013 mentioned here, let's say we have to handle translation or something in the English language. We can monitor, for example, inter-arrival times of the recognized phonemes, and if they depart from the regular inter-arrival time that we have in English, it's possible that we have to deal with a different language or with a different variation of that language, and the system is incompetent. And then for reinforcement learning and search and planning, one challenge there is that the reward function may change over time, and to handle that robustly would be to estimate the value of states and have an estimated value in advance. So, for example, when you're near the goal, you expect the value to increase, and if it doesn't increase, probably your actual reward function has changed. So I strongly advise all of you who use and deploy learned models to think and engineer in your systems these competence monitors, and they can be of any flavor among those listed here. So one problem at the root of this issue is actually the distribution shift in the data, right? We train and we design a system using some data that we collected from the phenomenon that we want to monitor or make decisions upon. And then in the real world, we see a different distribution. This is violating fundamental properties of learned models, and in designing engineering systems, this poses major issues. So, a formalization of this competence formalism would be to think about a side of predicting. So our hypothesis is H, right? Our learned model is H. Aside of predicting an output for xi, our instance for which we want to predict, to compute also a competence model. And we can threshold that. So this would be a formalization of those four listed before. And then we can even learn to increase this coverage of our competence by, for example, stating the probability for which the probability for which we have a high competence for our model. So now, if we want to learn both of these, we want to maximize coverage for each and also guarantee competence. So aside of this competence idea, which I think all of us should apply in practice, I think there are other ideas that can be employed. One is performing inference or causal models, but I would like to point you to another idea which started to be explored in practice. That is portfolios of models. Marvin Minsky in the early 80s famously stated that you don't really understand something if you only understand it one way. So remember, when we deploy, let's say, a computer vision model, that's one way of doing that task. Or if we implement our natural language processing model, that's one way of doing our task. And our tasks, in many cases, require more than that. Let's take this image here to the right. It's a landslide, rocks, a road, rain, fog, people. We people, when we see such an image, we see way more than our models see. A computer vision model will see these people, would recognize them, would also see a road, maybe the rocks, and so on. We, however, expand that into, for example, projecting the fact that the road is unusable, and if we wanted to drive on that road, we need to find alternative paths. Or if we know where the road is, let's say we can advise somebody who may use the road that that road is closed. Or if we know somebody close by, maybe we want to ask whether they are okay. So we started where we can afford it computationally. We started in Boeing, and also I've seen efforts outside of the company performing tasks in multiple ways. For example, if you want to recognize a person and all the data that you have on that person is with light in their face, and you use your favorite neural network for training face recognizers or, a person recognition or something like this. And suddenly, now in the real world, you encounter that person, and that person, there's no light on that person's face, or the sun is shining in the back. Well, in that case, we may want to use a different modality, for example, voice, or you may want to use a different set of features. For example, you recognize that that person uses a certain shirt that that person has used in the past, or you may want to recognize some gestures of that person. That means you have an extra layer of inference in which you connect multiple models that are all focused on recognizing that person and executing that task. So in conclusion, I'd like to summarize and to highlight the ideas of my presentation. So high-risk and emerging AI applications require robust AI systems and robust decision systems. One big challenge for robustness is to handle safely in a guaranteed mode these unknown unknowns. So there are situations, data instances, and observations for which we do not, see when we design the system or when we train the system. Research provides us ways to deal with that. And one way is to have a self-competence assessment. Another way would be to have still a competence assessment assured by a separate model. I presented you, and by the way, this is not new in research. The reject option in machine learning has been there for at least 20 years, and there's been research on that. But then also we discussed multifaceted understanding and portfolios of models. And I highly recommend that when you design your system and when you implement your system, to have these in mind. I believe that they should become a standard. At least a competence output from our models should become a standard for machine learning and for design. And I would leave you at this, and I'm happy to address questions and to have discussions about the points that I presented about.
Outstanding, Dragos. I'm looking at the questions coming in, so please continue to submit your questions online. I'm going to ask you, Dragos, that you stop showing your presentation screen to the audience so that they can see us on camera, and I'll bring my camera back up. Very well, and that's on that sharing tab. If you hit the stop showing screen button. Perfect. Now they can see us on the big screen. So thank you so much for that coverage there and those insights on the more technical aspects of artificial intelligence robust systems. You know, if you it's a number of different questions, I'm going to capture the main themes that have emerged here. What are some of the applications, if you can, to the extent you can talk about them, what are some of the applications that you're using artificial intelligence in, is in operations, R&D? What kind of aspects of the organization artificial intelligence is proven to be useful for you today?
First, we're extremely interested and we're developing autonomous systems. You may know that Boeing has invested a lot in WISP, which is an eVTOL system, autonomous. And also we have other programs that develop autonomous systems for the future of flight. Those are high stakes applications, and we know that they will have to be certified. So in that certification process, we need to handle this robustness in a principled way. And these kind of methods, not only we started to explore, but we started to also discuss for certification purposes. Other applications include robots in the factory. Other applications include the maintenance of airplanes. You may know that a 777, when it gets to the gate, it's actually a learned system that predicts potential faults, and then it goes through a very well-engineered system that advises on decisions on what parts to replace and so on. So in the company, we have a number of problems and applications in which we look at these high-stake decisions for which we require this robustness.
That's very, very interesting. On the autonomous part of the work, for those of us who are not, understand the details and the complexity engaged in there, when you think about an autonomous vehicle, a car, for example, versus an airplane, which is now you're adding some complexities of different dimensions now in the air. Does it become exponentially more complex, or it's about the same level of complexity for solving the problem, maybe kind of 2D versus 3D type of problem?
No, we understand the problem. It's not exponentially more complex. Um, Remember that the world of aviation is very regulated, and we understand the corner cases. We also, right now, you have on board an autopilot on all the airplanes, but that autopilot doesn't make intelligent decisions. It actually takes you safely from one point to another. Um, we have pilots and we have systems on board to make decisions, and those are hard. The same thing for the drivers. You have your cruise control and other systems, but you don't have systems for making decisions. I would say that the complexity is about the same, and there is a huge overlap between the problems, and then there are problems that differ. But specifically for uh, the robustness issues that I was mentioning. Let's say you have a detection system that has to detect all objects on the ground of an airport, right? And you have trained this system on all the or objects that you see regularly there, right? People, ground robots, ground cars, animals, and so on. Now suddenly, you see a new type of object, and that will happen. In fact, I've seen the other day a video of a Tesla suddenly seeing a carriage on the road. Now, this is one of those situations in which, the actual data, the test data, differs from the training data. What should you do about this? So first of all, the detector that you have for these objects should output some sort of an uncertainty measure, right? And you observe that now you're highly uncertain. You detect it, but you're highly uncertain about the nature of this object. Now, we have done it actually, and we have done a demonstration with our colleagues at the University of California in Berkeley, in which we have shown that now, if you have a high uncertainty about that object, the advisable thing is to use the most conservative policy, right? You see an unknown object, you detect it, you see it there. It is safe to use the most conservative policy that you have in your bag of policies with respect to objects. You see the carriage, drive slowly and drive as slow as possible. In fact, the slowest possible that you can do with respect to all the objects that you have seen so far. And that's one illustration of this competence estimation that I was mentioning. In practice, in machine learning, we call that open category detection. There will be always a new category. There will be always a new class of objects that you haven't seen. You trained on cats and dogs. There's always either a new type of cat or a bear or a monkey or something else, and you need to handle that. All you can do is to understand that you have a high uncertainty and you should act in a more conservative way.
Outstanding. Those are great insights, Dragos. I have one of the questions that came up and themes that came up as you're presenting, both here and also folks who are hitting me up on LinkedIn while you're presenting, was around this concept of portfolio models that you discussed. It's a very interesting concept. Not many people have brought that up before you did. This ability to use multiple AI models to look at the problem from multiple perspectives. I find that fascinating because that's the essence of innovation, kind of an intrinsic human ability to take a different perspective of the problem. I know you're kind of looking at that and trying to converge into solutions, but it does start making me wonder about the generation of more general AI models versus the very context-driven focused AI models we have today. General AI has been in the realm more of science fiction than science fact. Is there a direction that you take here on this portfolio of models that you're developing somewhat of a general AI model?
No, I'm not after general AI. I'm not a believer that, I'm still building. I'm a humble researcher and engineer, and I'm trying to build systems that are narrowly very good at something. I want them to be robust at a specific task. So all I'm trying to do is robustness. I don't want to enhance that world. But robustness has to handle these unknown situations. As I mentioned, you have a person, I want to recognize you, for example, and I have images of you, and suddenly now I have a different kind of light on your face. I should use other features. The problem with the portfolios of models is actually how much we can afford computationally. In some cases, you need to make decisions at a certain frequency. So in autonomous systems, we know that certain decisions are made at a high frequency, let's say 30 hertz, even 60 hertz, 100 hertz. For those, you may not have the luxury to have computing that computes, let's say, 5 or 6 models on the same task using different subsets of features, voice, whatever, image, and so on. But as soon as that is more relaxed, so for example, at higher levels of abstraction, for example, if you plan what you're going to do today and you know that you have to drive 60 miles by tonight, it's worthwhile, for example, looking at maps, looking at historical data, and so on. And if that's an autonomous system, it has all the time in the world to build multiple models for the same domain in order to have a good estimate on whether that task can be completed, and to also compute the best route. You realize, oh, there was a storm on my main road, and now I have to go on the side road, and I have to take another hour, right? These are things that we as humans do. Now, in order to complete the task, I'd like my autonomous system to do the same. And what it does is basically it computes the same thing in different ways, from historical data, from evidence today, from images. Maybe you should look in the news and check whether there was a landslide or something on your road. So that's exactly what I was saying. It's not for a more general intelligence model. No, it's for more robust decisions in narrow domains. I think we have plenty of work to do in these narrow domains. We're not solving, we don't have common AI systems that do high stakes, that make high stakes decisions. And I think that's where we should put our efforts on rather than the more general AI. I'm not a big fan of that.
I agree. And then the general AI is a very non-linear progression as well, right? I don't think that we're going to get there, but just incrementally looking at that. So that's very good. Very domain-specific, multiple AI systems on the same domain and from different perspectives to create a more robust model. It's a beautiful explanation. Let me follow up on that a little bit on this discussion of big data and small data. And I want to make it tangible. And I'll give a personal example. I'm an engineer and physicist by academic formation at the beginning of my career, and then one of the many things that we do is working with energy companies. There was a challenge that we had where we had an energy producer that, because energy production has emissions, and the EPA came with some mercury regulations on emissions for power plants. And we're doing a lot of experimentation to try to figure out if we could use machines that were done for sulfur dioxide removal to remove mercury from emissions. It's not a straight line path to that. So there are a lot of different approaches used. There's big data approaches used where we collected 18,000 data points over a 9-month period, and we use very advanced regression analysis and then some AI stuff on that. It gave us some perspective, but we backed off from that and we said, okay, let's do now a design experiment for this, as opposed to just look at the historical data, the abundance of data that we had, and Dragos with 8 data points versus 18,000 data points, we got much better quality of information that we could really understand some of the drivers of the system. And I don't think it's one or the other, but I think it's a combination of the two. And I'm curious about, how do you see this play of big data and small data that's well designed, where the quantity is different, but the quality can also be quite different. How do you merge that? Is this something that you see value on? How do you, what is your thinking about big versus small data?
Indeed, there are tasks when actually data is expensive. We have those. For example, we have tasks when we design parts of airplanes, we test them. A testing of that part can cost thousands of dollars. We know that in the world of medicine, for example, running a genome test or something, that costs money. So in many cases, actually, indeed, in many problems, you have small data. Now, for those tasks, actually, indeed, neural nets and these high complex models may not work. For those, we actually need sometimes a very good world model or physics model that can be combined with the little data that we have. We have to bias our models. We have actually active research going on in our company, and indeed, we have deployed models for which we had only very little data. I think it's very important for us, practitioners and engineers, not only to think about that, but to dedicate efforts. When I showed you at the beginning of my presentation the architecture of a decision system, and I showed you where learned models are, many of those components indeed may be built based on a few data points, and some are engineered because you may not have data. Let's be frank, for decision systems, if you want to learn those decisions, you need data near the border. But in some cases, you may not be able to produce that. You may not be able to crash an airplane or a car, right? You shouldn't do that. So now what do? Physics model of the world and do simulations. And in extreme cases where even that's not possible, maybe you don't even have an idea about the physics model, then probably you should explore slowly the space by using models that require very little data and extremely biased models, like probably your model, that the one that you mentioned was an extremely biased model, right? You need to bias it in order to handle little data. And I think, we should be able to, in machine learning and in decision systems in general, we should be able to handle the data that we have. In fact, I'd like to pose, to make a statement here. For me, data is only a reflection. It's a projection of reality at a certain moment in time. Let's say you take the screenshot of this image of the two of us and my president. That's one data point. However, the world behind that is much richer. Understanding of that world may help us enhance that data, right? And we need to understand that. In fact, most of our engineers and researchers lately are not only individuals who can take some data and run some models. We know that. We know how to do that. We understand now that we need to understand the world behind that generates this data, that builds that projection that happens from the world to the data point in order to be able to make decisions, because also the output, the decision, goes in that world and has consequences, right? If I buy a house now, I have less money and probably, a lot has changed. So all my predictors on what I should do should change. So that's something that standard machine learning tools are only starting to explore, this non-stationarity that results from our own actions, and understanding the data as a projection of the world. And I think for that, for all of us, it's very good to reread Judea Pearl's causality books, because in reading those and also in trying to understand more what an important role inference and probabilistic inference in particular plays a role in decisions. In fact, I haven't seen a decision system that doesn't have an inference step of some sort. And I think in the next few years, if I were to make a bet, is going to be the world of probabilistic inference and modeling uncertainty. That's what we need.
I absolutely love that, Dragos, because one of the greatest statisticians probably of this century, it said in 1925, was Walter Shewhart, said that that data, apart from its context, is meaningless. And you have phrased that to our modern times very well. And Henry Stevens is asking here, is there a bit of a trade-off when you're building these models between when you're really looking for this robustness that you discussed? Is there a trade-off here between robustness and the accuracy of the model, or there is no trade-off? You know, is there a kind of a percentage allocation? I don't know if it gets to be that precise, but is there a trade-off to be had here between model robustness and accuracy?
Yes, always. It's a strong trade-off, and then us engineers have seen that. So in many cases, you may give up some on accuracy just to stay robust. And in fact, when we talk to regulatory agencies who handle people, so for example, pilots, it's not that pilots are more accurate than machines. However, pilots, when we make an error, it shouldn't be that costly. So that's the idea. Maybe it should be allowed to make more errors, but you have a strong control on what kind of errors you made and you make. And that's the hard thing. Yes, it's a trade-off, and that's the trade-off that actually good AI engineers have tuned in most systems. And even 20 years ago, I remember actually one of the first models that I deployed in Boeing. I ended up using a very simple decision tree model simply because I was able to control it and to engineer it in a simpler way. Now, lately, we do that at a different scale, but it's a trade-off that will be the eternal trade-off. It's actually the trade-off that the engineer will have to be trained to tune.
Yep. This is a fantastic field, and I'm so grateful for you to share your wisdom and expertise with us. One final comment here. As you talk about the subject, I think there are a couple of things that came out as things that you seem to be passionate about. The robustness of models, this model portfolio approach for that robustness, and just open to make sure that I didn't misinterpret any of it, or maybe something you didn't mention. What are you excited about in terms of AI and its applications today in the next few years? If you'd like to stretch it a little bit, what gets you excited about the field more recently?
So at the beginning, I hinted that it's about the robustness of the components and the robustness of the system. They are two different things, but they come together. I think we as researchers and those of us who work directly on models should rethink them so that we can now use them as building blocks. Right now, we don't have building blocks, frankly, for engineering. We have building blocks for research. All the trained neural nets and untrained neural nets don't have any kind of guarantee so that they can be used as a foundation for a decision system. And then at the system level, I'm extremely excited about, as I mentioned, I think uncertainty modeling and probabilistic inference. It's something that we need to do at scale, and we need more research and possibly to see how we do it even within the existing neural net architecture. So that there are some research already going on looking at different sets of layers of the neural nets, especially at the end of the neural net, where we can do research. Even there is research on causal models on that. I think that's very important, and I'm the most excited about the inference in these models.
That's outstanding, Dragos. Fascinating topic, incredible insights. So grateful for and very thankful for your generosity in sharing. I know you're traveling through St. Louis. You stop here to share with our global audience your insights. On behalf of all of them, I want to say thank you. Your passion about the topic and knowledge about the topic are unmatched, and it's wonderful when we hear about passionate, competent people in their fields. And Boeing is very lucky to have you leading AI for them. And thank you again for sharing this expertise with all of us today.
Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to follow up with people in the audience and with you and your team. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Dragos Marginitou with us, a wealth of wisdom and expertise on artificial intelligence, real applications of artificial intelligence in engineering and design. And we started the day with talking about markets and artificial intelligence on retail and the applications on that. We got a little bit deeper on coverage of what Nestle is doing with artificial intelligence in manufacturing, in services, in R&D. And then we got Mahendra, who started talking about sustainable artificial intelligence, but had some technical problems. We're going to bring Mahendra for you in a future show for sure. And we finished strong, deeper with artificial intelligence in the more technical side and how the portfolio of models, uncertainty and probabilistic models being used with artificial intelligence now to create more robust systems for artificial intelligence. Thankful for all these great speakers we had today. Thank you for you in the audience. We had participants live from all over the world, from Abu Dhabi, from South Africa, from India, from all over the world, literally, all over the United States and Europe as well, who are participating live with us. And many of you, over 1,000 of you, who are going to be logging in these sessions and consuming this content at your pace through the recordings that you will receive as a registered participant. So in the next couple of weeks, you're going to be receiving an email from us as a registered participant that allows you to use a link and password to access all of these sessions and review at your own pace what was discussed here. The journey of excellence, innovation, and transformation acceleration continues. I think that you saw the announcement from Imran that our next conference will focus on supply chain. So that's going to be happening a few weeks from now. For those of you who follow me and what I'm doing around the world with more than 50,000 cross-industry leaders of excellence, innovation, and transformation, I'm doing some. I'm based here in San Antonio, Texas, and we're doing some master classes on excellence, innovation, acceleration here in San Antonio this week. And then we're heading to organizations in the beautiful state of Iowa, and I'm going to spend an entire week there with hundreds of cross-industry leaders of excellence, innovation, acceleration, who are making incredible changes and improvements and innovations in industries in the state of Iowa. So I'll spend the whole of next week there. There will be some announcements on LinkedIn about that. I want to thank everyone for being here. Whatever you are in the world, thanks for engaging meaningfully. Check out the LinkedIn posts, ask additional questions, connect with each one of our speakers. They are under my name on LinkedIn, posts for this conference. Feel free to ask questions. Thank our sponsors, Scale Agile. Thank you. None of this would be possible without your sponsorship and your commitment to allowing this level of and quality of information to be disseminated at a global scale at no cost to the participants. So we can only do that because Scale Agile is sponsoring this conference. So thank you, Scale Agile, for doing this. Imran, Hannah, and all the folks on the Betos Prokis digital team who bring these conferences to you. They have to deal with tremendous complexity behind the scenes to make it all work seamless. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Vijay Bajaj, the CEO of Prokis, for having the vision before the pandemic happened and then throughout the pandemic of doubling down on virtual events that create with high quality virtual events that bring great content for our global audiences. Thank you, Vijay, for your vision. Thank you, Brian Raffel, for behind the scenes as well for making it all work. And whatever you are in the world, have a great rest of your week. Have a great rest of your day, afternoon, and evening. And we'll stay connected for now and in future events, accelerating excellence, innovation, and transformation that creates value for all. So long from San Antonio, Texas. We'll see you in the next show.